Okay, sweet. All right. It's for the cameraman, really, more than anything. Okay. I mean, I could. I could. How's everybody doing? Great. Um, there's many ways that we can kind of start this, but maybe what I'll do is just like explain some of the work and how we got to that work, and then let's just kind of run from there. I won't get into all of the founder stories and the journeys, but I'll tap into a good bit of them. So, quick background, and I'll start collegiate first. So, undergraduate was in more of like a business degree, healthcare administration, healthcare management, but focused on healthcare. Graduate school was urban planning, international affairs, dual masters, focused in citizen engagement technology on the urban planning side, foreign diplomacy, and business. While I was there, what happens in grad school is that you're always trying to find what's my topic, right? And you kind of look at your peers to see if you have some acceptance on that topic. None of the topics really interested me like that, and I was working with the city commissioner at the time, and what baffled me is that, not particularly him, but how many elected officials made decisions on a daily basis but could not really tell the pulse of the community with data, right? And I just thought that was very, 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 very fascinating as we're looking at making decisions for everybody that's in this room. And so that led me into a decision I had to make, like, do I write a master thesis or do I start a company? And I had spoken enough places and had enough sideways people, well, sideways looks at me in relationship to what is this topic around citizen engagement and technology, because most urban planning, anybody in the urban planning field here? Okay, sweet. Most urban planning nuts do not like care about technology. And so that started my journey. So I started my first company. It was about 2012. We were highly focused in civic tech, way too early in civic tech. And I'll fast forward because it gets to the stuff that I think that's more relevant about the work that we're doing here, is that I did a postmortem report, and I think I told you the third bullet point on that on the stage, which was the ACT team model, architects, creatives, and techies. Fast forwarding, had a stint in commercial retail consulting, but while I was there, I probably went to church all of 4 times that year because we were doing 24/7 organizational change, cybersecurity transformation for some Fortune 100s. My NDA is off, so I can actually talk about the companies now. But nonetheless, I asked myself, okay, what do I want to do? You know, that big famous question, like, what do I want to do when I grow up? But nonetheless, I think the pastor had said something about his mentor told him, if you can't see clearly about what you want to do going ahead, go back to the thing that you want to do. And I was just like, I'm not going back to Tallahassee, Florida. It's just not happening. But I had a 3-bedroom, 3-bed house. And I had, if you're ever an entrepreneur and you start early, you know that Sally Mae is kind of like, you know, the demon on your back trying to say like, hey, I need my money. And you're like, hey, I need to run this company. And so defer, right? So nonetheless, I got rid of Sally Mae, thank God. And then, so I had some options. And so I said, okay, if I went back to Tallahassee, what would I do? And I said, maybe I can do a startup house. I was like, okay, well, what would I call it? I was like, oh, shoot, Act House. And it was 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, architect, creative, techie. I was just like, okay, I can do this. So I talked to my mentor, whole 9 yards. So fast forwarding, what birthed in that time and really the genesis of my thoughts that was culminating together was, how can we move into communities on the fringe of gentrification and turn them into hubs of economic development for the people that are in those spaces? What's interesting about the term gentrification, this is just literally from an academic perspective, right? It has no cultural nuance to it. But what happens often when we talk about gentrification is that we're really talking about the social gentrification of a particular area instead of the actual redevelopment. Like, nobody's going to complain about new houses, especially if you're in them, right? Anybody? Right. So we started to go down that path and look at, okay, how can we take this model? And of course, if you're an entrepreneur, you know the tests. You take the hits financially up front while you're still kind of perfecting the craft and perfecting the model. But we thought about how can we have incubation and acceleration as an amenity, right? As in the programming is embedded in the house. So kind of think about it as Silicon Valley's HBO's television show MTV's Real World TV show, put those two things together, subtract the drugs and the alcohol, all right? And you have the Act House, okay? And so what transformed from that place was us moving to these co-living models where we could look at providing innovators, and I'll just say like the creator economy. Innovators, artists, name another group. Cool. I really love y'all. Y'all are amazing. So what you can do is we were able to, instead of 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, three people, we looked at 3 bedrooms, 3 baths, 6 people, right? Because it was large bedrooms, shared spaces. And so what we're able to do is actually reduce the rate of rent per innovator that was 25% below the market rate of rent, right? So what does that do? As any type of creator or artist or entrepreneur, you're thinking about my immediate burn rate. Like, what is my immediate burn rate to start this venture? Anybody who's looking at rolling out their corporate job, they're thinking about, okay, well, how do I have capital, going back to security, right? Freedom, connection. Like, how do I actually switch the pendulum so therefore I can create bandwidth to create freely, okay? So we were scaling, went from about 6 to 54 co-living spaces, had to shut that down during the pandemic because we're doing shared space, and we're just gonna be a super spreader. And tough decision, and I was just like, look, nobody's gonna die. Thank you, brother. I'm kind of scheduled on like time slots with food and stuff like that, but it's how I get by. So anyways, one thing that was interesting, this is so interesting talking into this microphone. It's not actually amplified, but I'm with you, cameraman. I'm with you. It's all for you. It's all for you. So what was very interesting during that time is we started to think, like, ask ourselves questions. Like, what is mission critical about our work? Like, what really differentiates us? Like, what makes us stand out? And everything returned back to the ACT model, this people side. And we would vet innovators coming into the house based on this assessment that we created to understand if they were architect, creative, or techie. And one interesting thing about that during that time was we had a student that applied to the program. He was an accounting student, first generation Haitian immigrant student. And what was interesting is that he was studying accounting and finance. He's the oldest in his family. And so if you know anything about the Haitian culture, the oldest have such a big responsibility to create economic ways for everybody else to kind of make it out, right? Depending on the socioeconomic status of your family coming from Haiti. So he scored high. His subdominant was a creative, but he was only 2 points away from his dominant score as an architect. We're like, okay, why does he have all this creative ability? So we asked him some questions. And he said, yeah, I do all this design work on the side for all these other organizations, right? And so we brought him in for a second interview, but what he didn't know at the time was how large his skill sets could apply into spaces like the Valley or the Bay Area or Boston or any type of company that valued design at a high level. From his home, it's like, it's art. Like, you can't, nobody's funding that, right? But what we recognized in that moment was two things: a lack of identity as an innovator and not having awareness of that, and then not having awareness of the landscape and the field that he can bridge into was a difference. So as we shifted, like, a lot of our efforts, and mainly didn't really pivot from co-living, just put a pause on it because it's a model for us it yields well, right? But what we recognize is, okay, let's spend more time like on the human fabric and the connection components more so than the other stuff, and let that power everything. And so what's happening now, a lot of the work that we're doing in Tulsa is allowing our model to kind of like fill itself out in a very interesting way. Like, our highest aim is cross-cultural collaboration, right? Those are the roots, the tree, right? Having an accelerator focusing on Latinx and Black founders, we see that as that we're addressing the problem, the equity gap, right? But for us, we know that this technology side of, if everybody understood they were architects, creatives, and techies, then it coincides with everybody's innate ability to, one, want to connect, Two, we all have this mantra in our head from a young age, and our parents have done a good job of ingraining this in us. You don't work, you don't eat, right? And so the reality is that you kind of start breaking down silos when your connection points of how you begin to eat like don't look like you. You'll break down that silo because you're going to eat, right? That's something that's very, very, very keen. And then last but not least, when we saw that we can combine experience, expertise, and ethnicities from different spaces, we saw various perspectives will come to the table, which would then inform product, inform program, inform design, and all those things. So we have an assessment that's now psychological where it's actually really, 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 really freaking cool. I'm very excited about it. I'm trying not to geek out about it as I'm sitting up here talking into a microphone that doesn't amplify. But the most interesting thing about it, and I will say because I'm really trying to calm down, is that we focus on 3 areas: innovation mindset, not entrepreneurial mindset, and redefining and reclaiming that space for everyone. Because oftentimes when you go into corporate and you talk to an entrepreneur, the entrepreneur feels like the corporate person is looking at them like, you just don't want to work. You just have a dream. The entrepreneur is looking at the corporate person, or corporate person thinks the entrepreneur is looking at them like I'm not smart or not fast or agile or all these different things. But that's not the case, right? Our environment and the opportunities that we begin to work on shape those built muscles that we all have. They just need some exercising. And so we focus on innovation mindset, where we can kind of determine who's an entrepreneur, who's an entrepreneur, after looking at so many different attributes, probably 63 plus, and boiled it down to 3: risk, responsibility, and reward. We look at team cohesion, which is centered around communication styles, collaboration styles, and one's ability or non-ability to compromise. And then skill-based archetypes. It's very cool. One of our independent researchers is doing more deep dive research into this now. She's probably just finished up the 15th interview today I saw on the calendar. But it's very, very, very fascinating to see, because it informed us even how we picked our second cohort for our Act Tulsa Accelerator, right? And what is also informing our startups is that how they begin to look at humans. They're not looking at people just solely from a job requisition. Hey, I have this opening. But now I'm looking at capabilities. I'm looking at culture. I'm looking at team fit. I'm thinking through these things in respects to not how do I fill a position, but how do I bring in an individual that's going to fit within the team in order to solve problems, right? And now they're forming small ACT teams around problems, which is real cool. That's that side. I'm tracking well? You're doing great. Okay. On the accelerator front, what we found is that there is a huge, and I'll say large, probably grotesque issue within the philanthropic community, or perception within the philanthropic community, or rather problem that they experience, donors for the most part, around like a high level of internal passivity that they have in their private conversations around a lot of money going to overhead in organizations and not the work, right? And so what we saw in that space was, all right, Kaufman, is the lady from Kaufman here? Where is she? She's not. Okay. She might have left. Anyways, they produced a report that was very interesting, that most Black and Latinx-led family and friend rounds are about $3,000 to $28,000, right? It's a family and friend round in the Black and Latinx community. In predominantly white communities, a family and friend round ranges between $84,000 to roughly about $118,000, right? So when you think about capital you need to just, again, freedom, security, like the ability to create all those things, it necessarily doesn't provide the access to the freedom, to the bandwidth for Black and Latinx-led founders in order to sprint, right? However, this is just my thoughts, because I probably came from moving back to the States was kind of where, you experience like the hard times. You're like, man, like being a military brat traveling was great. And then like you come back to the States, you're like, hey, wait, why are we living in an apartment and not in this big old house? So interestingly enough, living in a space where there were problems either you learn how to problem solve and solve for that and develop solutions, or you just experience the weight of the burden of the problems, right? But I'll I'll probably put a bet on this. Like my old high school, there's so many ideas, like random ideas that emerged in high school, mainly because we just didn't have, right? So we were always thinking about witty and cool things. Long story short, what we decided is, okay, let's raise a $5 million fund and let's focus on making an evergreen fund where we can actually do $70,000 investments in Black and Latinx-led startups. So across the founder journey, there's idea, concept stage. Idea stages, I'm in the shower, I got an idea. Oh, wow, this is great, right? Concept stages, I started like having some conversations, started writing, researching. You know, I'm at the coffee shop. Hey, would you do this? Or like, what do you think about this, right? You're engaging. MVP is I now have not the full product, but I have some type of a mock-up or like, you know, some MVP that I can test, or I can test my initial thesis. Startup stage is I'm already rocking and rolling, have some customers, just a little bit, but we still need to take off. And then scale up, I already have about 6 or 7 W-2 employees and we're ready to rock and roll. We focus on late concept, early startup, and we launched our accelerator, pretty much taking the programmatics out of our co-living, put in an accelerator, where we started in July, and we started in Tulsa. And I was just speaking with, what is her name? She was sitting next to me at the lunch table. Yes, your name, Jen. I was just speaking with Jen, and I was like, it's very interesting in Tulsa, where it was almost like this double down of like hate, like in the community, because after the massacre, like Greenwood rebuilt, and they rebuilt well, right? A lot of people don't know that side of the story. I didn't. But what was interesting is that urban renewal, the architect Robert Moses, and a lot of other policies that emerged during that time pretty much dismantled Greenwood again, right? So what's fascinating to launch the accelerator in Greenwood is that there's this unique energy that's circling around, and it's emergence of like the birth of that spirit again, right? Like it never died, but it just needed some fire, right? And what we're focused on is not on the property game, as much as like my urban planning side would love to touch it, but we're focused on the intellectual property side, because during that time, you had more Black innovators targeted, right, to be killed and lynched in that time, because they carried the spirit and the fire of the community, right, in a very interesting way. So long story short, we've tested in our cohort 1, and we've had 2 startups trigger their return of the $70,000 back before the end of the program, and it's 6 months, right? Another one just received a term sheet last night after I just had to grill out this VC about stop playing games. So they just got their term sheet last night, and now they just triggered. So we had 3 out of the 9 startups in our first cohort already triggered their return. And the first cohort, the second cohort we've already brought in, takes about 6 to 8 companies. But we're seeing this thesis that we're looking at in the next 5 years, how can we create a wave of 320 to 400 Black and Latinx-led startups in order to go into the marketplace and go be great? Well, why? A very interesting report by McKinsey showed this very one thing, and I thought it was very interesting. I thought it was interesting. So I need to take a sip of this goddamn thing, but we're on a roll, so let's keep going. So in their report, what they produced was this. They did a demographic study around giving dollars. And what was very fascinating is that the number one culture that gave more time, that gave 4 to 6x times more than any other culture, was the African-American culture, right? It necessarily did not give in like large proportions as their blue-eyed, blonde-haired counterparts, right? But they gave about 4 to 6 times X, right? And I thought it was very fascinating because one thing that, and growing up as an African-American, like one thing I know is that even my auntie who's not my auntie is going to find a way to take care of me in some type of way, whether that's giving me a spanking because she knows I need it and I've like cut the fool, or she's just going to look out for me, right, and open the door and provide an opportunity. And so it's very interesting, this report they provided. So we're thinking through if we can create this impact of generational wealth where now our new LPs become our new companies, then we're starting to like put a dent in this side of the greater infrastructure that needs to be addressed, right? It's not the silver bullet, but if you think about let's say this is a brick wall and a mosaic of ecosystem players, it's our brick and it's what we have to do right? So I'm going to pause right there and stop just because I feel like,
You need a drink of coffee?
no, I was just thinking about the time. And I'm going to open up to some Q&A.
We're going to do Q&A.
Okay, sweet.
You really should take a drink.
I will.
Yeah.
Cool. Questions?